People who were kidnapped, held hostage, or were missing for a long period of time. What happened? Hey guys, as you might have guessed, this one has some talk about SA. If that's something you're not comfortable hearing at all, then I totally get it. Please, take care of yourself. Don't watch this video if it's not for you. With that being said though, let's get into it. I was drugged by a complete stranger. I was supposed to meet a friend for dinner that night, but she was running really late. While waiting, a man offered to buy me a drink. It quickly becomes a blur, but I remember him trying to assault me behind the building where we'd met. At that point, I was still coherent enough to resist. He tried to get me to leave with him in his friend's car. From what I've been able to piece together, a few teenage boys walked out of a nearby convenience store, and I literally followed them home like a lost puppy. The man and his friend followed us. We were walking for half a mile, trying to get me into the car with them. I credit those teenage boys for potentially saving my life. They kept me from getting into the car. I woke up 10 hours later in what I imagine a crack house looks like, to the sight of a freakishly large lizard staring me down from behind its glass terrarium. But I was fully clothed, and on a nearby table I found my wallet, nothing removed, cell phone, blown up with missed calls and messages, a glass of water, and 2 Advil. It felt a lot like the scene in The Hangover when the guys wake up and find a tiger in the bathroom. I'm an upper middle class, college-educated, reasonably attractive girl in my early 20s. On one hand, I should have known better than to accept a drink from a stranger. On the other hand, to this day, it doesn't seem taboo to me for a man to offer to buy a woman a drink. I'm much more cautious now, and I'm just very thankful to be okay. Next story. Was kidnapped by my birth father when I was around 7 years old during a visitation weekend. I got into the car, he went over to my mom and said, "Take a good freaking look, because I'm never bringing her home." He was taking me to his parents' farm for the weekend, so my mom ran inside and called his father and told him. After the 5-hour trip to get there, my birth father got out of the car and his father punched him in the face, made him get back into the car and drive me straight home. So while it wasn't that long, it wasn't a bad experience for me. I didn't know this had happened, but I can only imagine how upsetting it was for my mom. Seriously, what did he expect to happen, though? If he says that, I would have assumed he was just going to, screw off, go wherever. But no, he went to where he said he was going to go, to his family, who your mother has contact with. Did he just assume that your mother wouldn't tell them? Would just, keep quiet about it, be like, that was strange, and move on? Come on, man. Next story. I was kidnapped in Latin America. My dad was a professor for a university and my mother was in the military at the time. My dad owned 2 apartment buildings side by side. There was a civil war happening in my country at the time against the government and rebels. My mom had a grocery store in the same complex as the apartment buildings they owned. I would play inside the store. From what I'm told, there was a couple in my complex that had planned to kidnap me or my brother. The couple got to me first while I was playing inside my family's grocery store. I wasn't found for more than 48 hours. All I remember was a straw basket and me crying the whole time. Possibly for that very reason, the wife of the couple had remorse for me and brought me back to my mother while her husband left for work or whatever. She begged my mom for forgiveness but was brought to the police. After, we moved to a different country to escape the war, which ironically ended a year after our departure. Next story. Apparently, when I was pretty young, not sure what age, maybe between 3 and 5, my dad kidnapped me and my 2 older sisters. He had a drinking problem at the time and was wanting to take his own life and was bipolar. My mom told me of cases when he would say things like burning the house down with all of us in it. Anyway, he kidnapped all 3 of us and started to drive drunk to God knows where. My mother called the police and they were able to find us before anything bad happened. Me being so young, though, I don't really remember much. My mom ended up divorcing him shortly after for our safety. He wasn't allowed to visit us without supervision after that. No doubt a horrifying experience, but I do hope he's doing better now. Got some help, some medication maybe, whatever it takes. At the very least, hoping he's off the drink. Glad you ended up alright though, OP. Next story. I was once held hostage in the Peruvian jungle. As a traveler with a backpack, I decided to take the cheapest bus from Lima to the jungle, and found myself in the middle of some locals, lots of chicken, and whatever they used to travel around with. After 8 hours riding in that bus, we suddenly came to a stop in the middle of nowhere. When I looked outside the window, I saw some guys wearing ski masks and holding rifles. They were the coca farmers protesting against new laws, and to not disturb the tourism, they only stopped the local buses, not the expensive ones. Anyway, after 10 hours in the bus, not being allowed to exit, they just let us go. Really wasn't that horrible, and in the end I got a good story out of it. The only crappy thing about all that at the time was that the bus only had one little toilet, and after so many hours of not being able to empty it, things got a bit smelly. Next story. When I was 4, my dad picked me up for a visit and left my mom a note written in crayon that said, "Goodbye, mommy forever, and took me to New Orleans for about 3 weeks. All I remember really is being really bored in a one-room motel kind of thing, but it didn't take him long to realize that being a full-time dad sucks, and he brought me back. This was just a piece of the emotional mind screws my folks did with each other through me. It's taken decades for me to fully appreciate that it all had to do with each other, and that their regard for me was actually very low. Next story. When I was 12, my parents separated. Things had always been nasty between them, so I was glad my mom had kicked my dad out. A few days later, my dad showed up at my middle school to pick my sister and me up. This was before schools were crazy strict about who kids were left with. He said that he had talked to our mom, and she told him it was okay to pick us up and spend the evening with us. So we get into his pickup, and I immediately noticed that his shotgun is hanging on the rack of the back window. I used to go hunting with him, so I knew it was off season. It was weird for the gun to be there. He calls our mom a little ways into the drive and says, "I've got the girls. I'll bring them home when I can come too. If not, tough crap." He hung up. She called, and he eventually turned his phone off. My mom said she called the police, but because they were still legally married with a no custody arrangement, there was nothing they could do. My dad ended up taking us to his mom's house. I remember him crying and asking if I would choose him in the divorce. I said no. I wanted to stay with my mom, and he starts throwing his head against the wall. The wall is dented and bloody, and he's got a couple knots swelling on his forehead. He said, "See, this is what you make me do. You don't want to make this any harder on me, do you, sweetheart?" Just thinking about that now makes me sick to my stomach. So we're there for a couple of days. My mom came and knocked on the door. My dad called the cops on her for trespassing, so she had to leave. Another day or two goes by, and he finally says he'll take me to Lowe's, where my mom worked at the time, to see her and say hi. We walk in, start going down the lumber aisle, and I see my mom towards the back. She sees me, drops to her knees crying, and throws her arms out for me. I start running and make it to her for about half a second before he ripped me away again. He had a hold of my left hand barely, fingernails digging in, and was dragging me back out of the store. I still have little scars on the back of my hand from him. I could see my mom chasing after us, screaming, "Somebody please help. He's got my baby. That's my little girl." So he throws me back in the truck and speeds out of there and heads to the back/country roads. I was bawling, and he just kept asking why I did it. Why did I have to mess it up? We finally get back to his mom's house, and there were a couple of cop cars waiting there. He finally gave up, and we got to go back to our mom. He never got in any kind of trouble for the whole thing, besides a nationwide ban from Lowe's. Just to continue the story a little further, my mom had filed for divorce during this time. Divorce takes 60 days from filing to be complete or official. 2 days before it was final and over, my dad called my mom while she was at work, saying, "Please call this off. We can fix this and get through it. I love you, please," crying the whole time. She kept saying, "No, it's over." So he finally stops crying and says, "So this is how you want things?" She said yes. Then he called her a female dog. About an hour and a half later, my mom gets another phone call at work. This time, it's the fire department. Our house, we lived out in the country, was on fire, and no one had even seen it until someone drove by and called it in. Well, by that time, it was a total loss. The fire marshal ruled it as arson, even saying it was a lover's fire or something because the fire had been started on or underneath their bed. I lost everything I ever had, minus a stuffed animal and the clothes on my back. He never got caught for that either. A few years ago, when he was still screwed up on pills, he admitted to my half-brother that he was behind it. Anniversary of the fire was actually yesterday, 14 years ago. Going through the story, I knew this guy was unstable, for lack of a better term, but actually setting fire to their house, and also the police not being able to do anything while he held his daughters hostage, absolutely infuriating. I'm glad you made it out of there physically okay, OP. Although I have no doubt that this event would leave some lasting mental effects. It's absolutely insane that he can't be held accountable for any of this. This guy is a dangerous, dangerous man. Next story. I was around 4 and my brother 2. We were in the car and my mom decided to park quickly to go to withdraw money. The bank was right over the road, so she thought it would be fine to leave us in the back of the car for literally 2 minutes. Within those 2 minutes that she was gone, 2 people decided they were going to steal the car, seemingly not aware of the 2 young children in the back, my brother and myself. I still remember looking at these strange men driving us away. Of course, as you do, we started crying, and then they noticed their error. They weren't just stealing a car, but also kidnapping 2 children in the process. At this point, my mom was completely freaking out. She walks out of the bank and the car is just gone. We're gone. She calls my dad, who's in London for a business meeting, and of course, the police. Everyone on the street was trying to help her and figure out what happened. All this happening while we were being driven away. The two men eventually decided to ditch the car, along with us, probably coming to the conclusion that they were car robbers, not child kidnappers. They also thankfully left the car windows open, as the heat was enough to end you if you were in a car with no AC and closed windows. I have this very clear memory of the policemen opening the doors to the car, one of them picking up my little brother's milk bottle. We were on front page news the next day, and my parents were extremely relieved. I can imagine they experienced a lot more panic and fear that day than we did ourselves. Next story. I was picked up by strangers in San Francisco when I was 4. My brother and I both had thrown up in the car, and my parents were dealing with that. I was very easily distracted, so as I walked a few steps between two of the adults, I missed the target and just kept walking. I remember looking at a golden door. My parents were looking the other way, and I wandered off, immediately lost. A man and a woman asked me if I was lost. They did not ask the family nearby with 2 car seats if I belonged to them. They instead picked me up and hastily walked in the opposite direction. My mom looked up and saw my distinctive pink shoe sticking out from in front of the lady, so they ran after them and got me back. The couple said they were taking me to the police station. Pretty sketchy though. Who knows what actually would have happened. Yeah, so I gotta say, if a child is lost, my first instinct isn't exactly to pick them up and run in the opposite direction. I think your suspicions are probably correct. I guess it's just another one of those situations, though, where your parents can do literally nothing about it legally, huh? Well, they got you back, and that's really what matters, so hey, we got that going for us at least. Next story. When I was 25, I met a charming man at a party. We went on a date and it was going well. We ended up back at my house. Is it kidnapping if he wouldn't leave my own home? For 2 or 3 days, he wouldn't let me sleep. He attacked me and assaulted me. He threatened to end my cats, me, and my family. And then he finally hit me in the head so hard I blacked out. When I came to, he was gone. I spent the next year and a half in and out of the doctor's office and eventually had a complete mental breakdown. Began drinking excessively and tried to take my own life. A friend put me in the hospital and took me in when I got out. Then I met my now husband, and life is much better. I'm still something of a mess. I don't sleep well and I have to take a lot of medications, but I don't sweat the small stuff anymore. I also don't really talk to strangers. Next story. My former brother-in-law used to deal in California. Not weed, obviously, but harder stuff. I'll call him Jack for the purpose of this story. One day, Jack screwed over the wrong people. A van showed up at Jack's house. 3 men broke in, beat him unconscious, then took him and his 2-year-old son. Jack woke up tied to a chair in some type of warehouse. His son was tied up on a chair across the room, but unharmed. The men then beat Jack some more until he blacked out again. At this point, it was clear the abductors intended to end him. Jack woke up several hours later, still tied to the chair. His son was still okay. The 3 men were sitting around a table in another room. They had been doing some H and were comatose. On the table were lead pipes, brass knuckles, guns, bats, knives, a freaking arsenal. Jack managed to wiggle out of the ropes. He then untied his son and slipped out the back of the warehouse. He went to a friend's house who stitched him up. By now, it was about 4 a.m. By 6 a.m., Jack and his son were on the road to another state. That was the day he quit using and quit dealing. Jack went to rehab, and today he still attends AA. He's mostly clean, but he relapses every now and then. His son is now in his early 20s and has no memory of the event. I don't think Jack ever told him about it. Next story. This happened in India. My brother was riding his bike at around 50 kilometers an hour and hit an old man riding his bike in the opposite direction on a one-way. The old man's son got my brother and took him to a lesser-known part of the city. Apparently, the old man didn't have any insurance, and his son wanted my brother to pay for it. My brother was extremely terrified, and he gave my parents a call that very night. My parents registered a police complaint, after which the police easily tracked them down and kicked some butt. My brother is still terrified of that incident, and never really likes to talk about it much. Next story. In high school, all of my friends went to a concert of a band I didn't like. I decided to hang out with the only other friend who didn't want to go to the concert, and we just drove around and had a few drinks. We ended up in a parking lot behind the restaurant he worked at. He was older when he tried to assault me. Won't go into details. I started crying because we were just friends and he knew this. He locked me in his car, in which he's like, "Oh, please just do it with me. I'm having none of it. I'm banging on the windows." So he drives me to his house and locks me in the room. I was there for hours and so mad, with him trying to corner me, telling me he wouldn't let me go home because I would tell everybody. Eventually, I'm screaming, and his mom, who I knew, makes him let me go home. The next day, he shows up at school and tries to apologize like nothing happened. After telling a few people, I find out I'm not the first girl he's tried this with, but has succeeded with several. I get a few of the other girls to come forward and we get the school resource officer involved. They go to arrest him and he's in science class drinking alcohol out of a water bottle and hitting on the teacher. He ended up going to jail for a while. Not long enough though, because I can look up his name and still see a bunch of charges for similar incidents. I would like to think my 15-year-old self was pretty badass in briefly stopping a creepy criminal. Next story. I was almost robbed twice as a child. The first time, a man entered my mother's car and held her at knife point and requested a lot of things, including myself. My mother had none of it and went to gouge his eyes out with her nails. The man fled and escaped bleeding severely. The second time was when my mother and father were putting gas in their car. They turned around for 1 second and I was gone. My mother ran into the middle of traffic and stopped everyone. She yelled out that her son was missing, while everyone was honking, telling her to get out of the way. Soon after, everyone started helping her look for me. Next thing you know, I ended up on the other side of the street in the middle of cars. I guess the person knew he was close to getting caught because he had no way of moving forward with his car other than leaving it. I was a baby the first time and maybe a speechless toddler the second. Either way, I was too young to remember. Next story. When I was around 8, my dad was really drunk and held his girlfriend's daughter, and me at gunpoint for like 4 hours. It ended because his girlfriend's brother, who was a huge guy, tackled him. The gun shot off into the ceiling and he was arrested. I think everything got dropped down to a discharging a firearm in city limits and he did a few years. As for me, I'm fine. Next story. When I was 11 or 12, my mom started dating my now stepfather. She had also just gotten a new job, and on this particular day, I was home alone after school. It was around 4 or 5 p.m. A lady knocked on my door inside the apartment building where we lived and told me she worked with my mom, and she asked her to come grab me and look after me that night as she had to work late. I, being the brilliant child I was, went with her. She turned out to be my stepdad's ex who had gone psycho at finding out he was dating my mom and apparently found out where she lived and about me and stuff like that. She took me to her house and I met her other kids. I stayed the night there and she played music and we danced around. First time I ever heard Material Girl. In the morning she was super cool and asked if I wanted to skip school. Awesome, right? She called and told them I was sick. We danced some more. She then started telling me things about my mom banging with this guy I hardly knew and that she had been watching them through a window. Okay. I remember going upstairs to the bathroom and starting to make a plan to escape. I pictured myself grabbing the big phone she had in her room and smashing it over the head. While I was up there, I heard pounding on her door and she answered and began yelling. I looked down the stairs and saw my mother at the door. I ran down and went to her and she was calm, just standing there while the lady screamed. Once she had me and the lady quieted to tell me that I should stay with her, my mother advised her that if she ever saw her near me again, she would end her. No yelling, just matter of fact. We never saw her again. All in all, I got to miss a day of school and danced the night away to Madonna. I'd give it a 7 out of 10. TLDR, mom's new boyfriend's ex-girlfriend kidnapped me in a jealous rage. OP, I'm glad you can see the humor in all of this, because this sounds terrifying to me, man. Like, something about the seeming innocence of it makes it scarier to me. The fact that you were just having a good time and whatever and had no idea what this person's actual intentions were. Shout out to your mom, though. Sounds like she's protective in the best way possible. Next story. My girlfriend's grandma was kidnapped when she was younger for 2 to 3 days. She won't tell me the full story, but from what I've pieced together, she used to be quite pretty. And one time she was walking down the road. An H-addict drove by and just took her, keeping her trapped in his closet. She rolled up her arm once and showed me a bunch of circular burns on her arms. She explained to me that the burns were from the cigarettes the man smoked and would put out on her. She won't tell me much of what happened, I don't blame her, but this event led her down a path of mental illnesses, drug problems, and led her to becoming a street worker where she met and married her pimp. Their baby is my girlfriend's mother. It just goes to show that one crappy act from one person to another can screw with someone's entire life. My girlfriend's family is full of mental illnesses and stories like these. Assaults, kidnappings, attempted murders, and people taking their own lives galore. I always thought these types of stories were made up to be so big for Hollywood, but they're real. Now I get sick whenever I hear stories like these, which seem to be all over Reddit recently. Be kind to each other, people. Next story. When I was about 4 years old, my parents, little brother, and I were at church for the Easter Mass. Loads of people. After Mass, we left and we were walking down these huge, wide stairs in front of the church. My dad was holding my hand. My parents stopped to say hello to an acquaintance, so Dad let go of my hand. Apparently, I had kept that hand up, waiting for Dad to take it back, and I wasn't looking up. So when someone held my hand and started walking, I thought it was my dad, so I walked. Apparently, it was a dude who was trying to kidnap me. From what I remember, he took me to the back of the church, gave me a piece of lemon candy, and told me to wait there. I did, and by chance one of my dad's friends was passing by there and recognized me. He thought it was weird I was alone, so he came by to ask me where my parents were. According to him, I told him I didn't know, so he offered to take me to them. This is where the funny part happens. I refuse, telling him I didn't know him and that I wanted my dad and I wouldn't go anywhere without him. He laughed and called an altar boy to wait with me, and went to get my parents, who by then were white with worry. My mom had fainted too, although it had only been around half an hour. My parents came, and after, they made sure I was okay. Asked me what happened, and I'm told I was super calm and not scared at all. Don't know what happened to the would-be kidnapper, but I suppose he got scared and went away. Next story. I was kidnapped by my father at 18 months. My parents were young, going through a divorce. She fell out of love, and father was heartbroken. I was at a daycare while my mother worked. My father learned that she could be seeing someone else and asked her to settle down. She said she couldn't promise. My father, who was in the country on a student visa, took me from daycare and on the next flight to the other side of the world. Too late for local police to do anything, and with no recourse due to the differences in laws between the countries. Even Interpol was involved. Within a couple of weeks, documents were forged to get me a new identity and allow me to travel. I was then given to uncle and aunt who had no kids and taken to yet another country. My first memories are just beyond this period of time, so I grew up not knowing that my parents weren't my biological mother and father. 25 years later, I've now met my mother, half-brother, and more relatives than I can remember. I've been trying to learn a new language so that we can have conversations. It has been a relief and very, very emotionally exhausting. I've been through periods of anger, sadness, and everything in between. OP lived a whole life as a child and a little bit into adulthood not knowing their parents. This is absolutely insane. The fact that OP was reunited at this point is a miracle, really. I bet OP's actual mother and that side of the family are so relieved to have them home. Or not have them home, I guess, but just, in their lives. What an incredible outcome to an insane situation. Next story. When I was 5 years old, I was brutally kidnapped in my country, Sweden. I don't really remember much at all, but when I think back, I remember talking to someone on a cell phone that someone else held for me. The kidnappers were apparently amateurs because they let me off within a few days. I think I was too young to quite understand what was happening. My life today is ordinary, but it's quite the story to tell people. Next story. When I was like 6 or 7, I was at a wedding in India. Being a wedding, I was dressed fairly fancily and was wearing a necklace of some kind, can't remember what, but I know it was worth a lot, at least $500. Some guy comes up to me and says, not even exaggerating, "There's an elephant in the bathroom." He pretends to fix something on my collar and somehow manages to lock me in the bathroom. For stupid reasons I'm not aware of, the lock was on the outside, I think, so I couldn't get out. When someone finally did come to get me, we couldn't find the perpetrator either. I wasn't very smart as a kid. Next story. When I was 5 years old, my mom told my dad she was taking me to my friend's birthday party. She took me straight to Heathrow Airport and I was on a plane to the Philippines within 6 hours. I lived with her and her family for a year while dad and police worked out where I'd gone. It was quite a nice time, and towards the end of it, Dad would come and visit and take me out on trips. I first learned to ride a bike on one of those trips. Eventually, Dad said the custody issue had to be worked out, but as law in the Philippines was biased towards the mothers, they agreed to work things out in Indonesia. However, Dad was aware of our flight plan and knew we would be changing planes in Hong Kong, and as it was still a British territory at the time, he was waiting for us there with the police. They started court proceedings, but my mum was bluntly told by a solicitor that the case could go on for decades, and every penny spent on lawyers was a penny not spent on me. So my mum gave up custody of me to my dad. I was a bit shell-shocked for the next few years, but gradually recovered. It meant a lot to me when my mum eventually moved back to the UK and helped out. Now it's all distant family past. Mum and dad have both remarried to other people and get on fine. What do you mean they get on fine? How can this possibly happen? And they're just like, yeah, them, an old flame, such fond memories. And not think, they kidnapped my child. I had the police waiting for them at the airport. These people have better mediation skills than I do, clearly. Next story. Not too relevant, but when I was a young lad, probably 10 or 11, I was just walking around my neighborhood. Being a kid and having nothing to do, just walking around was entertainment, after all. I was on a small hillock when suddenly I see an older teenager running towards me. He was running uphill, practically on all fours. I haven't noticed him until he was just a few meters from me. It scared the crap crap out of me, so instinctively I ran away. We were on an open field between two separate neighborhoods, and unfortunately we were running away from my house. The teenager gave chase. I looked around my back a few times and he was running like he was drunk or on drugs. I believe the latter was the case, as glue sniffing from a plastic bag was popular at that time, even among teens. Nevertheless, there was a long stretch of straight path, and he was older than me. I was never that good at long-distance running. Had there not been a man walking before us, he might have caught me. But I ran towards the man and just walked right behind him. When I looked around my shoulder, the boy stopped at a pole we passed and just stood there. I thought I was safe. The man walked a few dozen meters and made a turn at the next crossing. I went straight, and when I looked around, the teen went after me again. So I dashed through the street and dove into a small newspaper shop that was thankfully located at the nearest block of flats. When I came running, I asked for help, saying someone is running after me. There was an older lady in the store at the time. Just a few moments later, the teen ran into the store after me. I don't really remember if he said anything. The store clerk, an older guy, and the lady both chased the teen away. The lady made a big fuss, screaming at him, and he ran away. Just a moment later, we came out of the store, and me and the lady saw that the teen was hiding, poorly, around a nearby corner and looking out for me. The lady screamed at him, but he wouldn't go away. Another lady came, and she quickly learned about my predicament. I was pretty shaken up and tired. One lady offered to lead me through the back door of the building so I could walk out the other side and could probably slip by unnoticed, but I wasn't convinced. This teen was determined to get me for some reason. The other lady was very generous, and after a moment she offered to stay with her for a few hours until the guy was gone. I accepted and got to play some Wolfenstein 3D on her son's PC, and I even got some chocolate and a glass of soda. Very nice lady, and her son was also tolerant of me. After some time, I thanked her and headed home. The boy was gone. I never knew why he wanted to catch me, but I'm pretty sure I would have been dead or assaulted or both. Next story. My biological father kidnapped me. My mother didn't know where I was for my first birthday. She called the cops, hired a private detective, and got his comas involved since they were military. The best I can piece together is he had taken me to a nanny's house and dropped me off. My mother went through the courts and my father was forced to turn me over. I was missing for almost 2 months. My mother remarried and my stepfather adopted me. During their divorce, he kidnapped me once and did another attempted kidnapping. Both were very traumatic. My stepfather lost visitation rights after the first because he had beaten me so bad and ripped the phones out of the wall when I made a dash for it. The attempt was at my school, and the teachers and principal did nothing. Thankfully, the bus driver for my daycare stopped him and made him give me to her. She called the cops and he was arrested. Childhood was very traumatic. Next story. My dad pulled up outside of a girl's house so he could take her out to dinner. The girl's neighbor's house was being broken into repeatedly, and he saw my dad sitting in his car. So he walked up to my dad and punched him in the face, his windows were down, and pulled him through the window of his car and threw him into his. The guy had his wife in the front seat with a 4 or 5-year-old boy on her lap. They drove to the woods where he beat the living hell out of my dad, barely breathing. He kept telling my dad to confess to breaking into his house. My dad had no idea what he was talking about. After around 3 hours, he drove my dad back to his car and kicked him out. My dad found his car still running. The girl had never shown. He crawled in and drove home where he collapsed into my grandfather's arms. After 2 weeks in the hospital, my dad fully recovered. The police went to the neighbor's house where they arrested the wife but couldn't find the husband. Long story short, the husband showed up to the wife's court hearing where he was identified and arrested. So my dad was kidnapped and beaten simply for being a teenager in the wrong place at the wrong time. Next story. Went to a bar with a few buddies. We went inside and had a drink, then ordered another. My 2 friends and I stepped out for a quick smoke. Couldn't smoke in the bar. And the other guy I really didn't know well stayed inside. Well, we're outside smoking and the bartender comes out saying that, "Your friend just put something in your guys' drinks. I'm gonna go ahead and make you different ones." So we all go inside, pissed as hell at this guy, and ask him what the hell is up. Turns out he crushed up a few blue pills and put them in there. Frickin' idiot. Hey, shout out to a homie bartender. But also, what the hell, man? What is wrong with you? What's even the goal with that? Never mind. Next story. My mom and her older sister were kidnapped by their biological father at age 3, mom, and 5, aunt. They were taken from Texas and moved to Florida and grew up there. They were missing in Texas for something like 20 5 years. My mom didn't meet her biological mother until she was nearly 30. She had no clue she'd been kidnapped. Everything finally came out when my mom went snooping around. She visited Texas, found her mom, and that's when they all figured out what had happened. They were kidnapped back in the 60s/70s, and her mom didn't really put in the effort to find her children. She had just gotten remarried when the kids were taken and was pregnant with another. It's an all-around bizarre situation. Side note, fun fact, my mom met my dad when she found her biological mom in Texas. My dad is my mom's half-brother's best friend. Whoa! The words best friend doing a lot of heavy lifting at the end of there. For some reason, my brain was convinced OP was just going to say, my dad is my mom's half-brother. I don't know why. I thought that. Next story. When I was young, my family lived in a very small town in southwest Arkansas, Mena, also known for the Iran-Contra affair, and loads of conspiracy involving the Huckabees, Clintons, Rockefellers, and basically just a nice little cesspool of uneducated ne'er-do-wells. I'm not sure what my mother's actual position was, but she worked closely with the DA and had a pretty big role in the state child protective services. We were constantly donating our toys, clothes, and taught to relinquish some of our Christmas and birthday gifts unwrapped to the children my mother worked with. In first grade, my family lived 30 miles out in the woods, and I often sat on the school bus for nearly 2 hours to get home in the afternoons. It was rare that my parents would ever pick us up from school, but this day I was a car rider. Oh man, I was stoked. Usually this meant I had gymnastics, a birthday party, or that mom and I were going to chill out with some ice cream. But no, the police showed up, shuffled me into a police car, and hauled me off to the county courthouse. I was in tears, thinking I had broken the law, and I would now be imprisoned for the rest of my natural life. It was traumatizing. So, what had happened? Well, my mother was working a case at the time. 2 children about my age from Oklahoma were eyewitnesses to an extremely disturbing case. These 2 kids were in witness protection at the time, waiting for the trial. Some pervert had done some truly terrible things to not only these kids, but was suspected of doing these things to many other children as well. Somehow the guy's on the loose. No one knows where he is, and everyone is freaking the hell out because this sicko is out looking for these kids. Now, I'm not sure how the hell any of this happened, and I'm sure that I'm not supposed to know, but this guy finds out that my mom has these 2 children in hiding. My mom is at the DA, not even her office, and the phone rings for her. It's the sicko. He tells my mom that he wants the kids. Of course, she refuses. He then proceeds to tell my mother that in just a few minutes, her daughter, my name, will be waiting outside at the carpool. He proceeds to describe what I was wearing that day, what I looked like, my backpack, everything. Next thing you know, cops pick up the guy across the street from my elementary school behind the tire shop, haul me off to the courthouse, and my mom is trembling and in hysterics. My mom told me this story when I was way too young to hear it, and it has weighed on me ever since. Next story. My friend growing up had one of those, we have to visit all 50 states dads, which is awesome, but that's what they spent their summers doing. Highlights of North Dakota included being taken hostage in their hotel room by a guy who busted through the deadbolt on their door and held them at gunpoint for 8 hours until the cops could talk the guy down from whatever it was he was on. This was kind of pre-ice, like mid-90s, so who knows what drugs this guy had taken. Friend, never been back to North Dakota since. Edit. Weird twist to the story. My current SO is from the town in North Dakota where this all went down. We met like 3 years ago and I'm 34 now. This happened to my friend when he was about 15. Next story. This didn't happen to me but a family member, my cousin. He and his brother went to Tijuana and were drinking at a bar. They were finishing up their drinks when a girl approached my cousin and asked him to dance. He obliged while his brother stayed at the bar. After some time passes, his brother looks to the dance floor to look for him, and he doesn't see him or the girl on the dance floor. He checks the restroom outside, asks around, and gets nothing. He decides to stay for a number of days to see if he'll turn up, but gets nowhere. Eventually, his brother returns home, and everybody in my family knows that he's missing. We all think he went off somewhere with the girl, lost his phone, got lost, etc. Then my aunt receives a phone call. It's a man, and he's telling my aunt that he has her son and that he wants $10,000 for him or they will end him. My aunt asks to speak with him to make sure he's alive, but they say no. She tells them to give us some time to come up with the money as we don't have that type of cash laying around. My aunt tells the police about it, but they say there's nothing they can do because they have no jurisdiction. We live in the US. The kidnappers call my aunt again, and they tell her to wire the money to a location here in the States. The cops say if the withdrawal is made here, they can get involved. The cops wait there for somebody to make the withdrawal, and when the man does, they make the arrest. The guy gives the cops nothing. No names, location, anything. My aunt stops receiving phone calls from the kidnappers. They just abruptly stop. Months pass and we hear nothing. My family assumes the worst, and they think he has been offed. I remember being upset with my family that they had given up. Out of the blue, my aunt receives a phone call from a hospital in Mexico. They say they have been nursing a man there for months. He had no identification on him and couldn't remember anything. He slowly started to remember his name, phone numbers, and relatives. That is when the hospital had called. It was my cousin. Eventually, he was released from the hospital and came home. He couldn't remember anything that happened at the bar or anything after that, only from before and when he was in the hospital. TLDR, cousin was kidnapped in Tijuana. Kidnappers wanted $10,000 or they said they would end him. Cops catch one of the kidnappers, but they give up nothing. Nothing happens for months, and we assume he's dead. Hospital calls and say they have cousin who couldn't remember anything. Next story. I guess here's some background to this story. My mom passed away when I was 2, and my dad rebounded pretty quickly and remarried a couple of months later. Anyway, as you can expect, this lady was pretty crazy. We were from Canada and she was from the Caribbean, St. Martin to be specific. So she wasn't a fan of the cold, and convinced my dad we needed to move to Florida when I was 4 or 5 years old. Anyway, she was abusive for the fun of it, but would hide it from my dad. He ended up witnessing it and decided that he and I would move back to Canada the next day. She was not down for that plan. She ended up sneaking me to France between that time, which I guess was easier like 20 years ago when custodial rules were different. Dad found out where I was about a month later and I was sent back and we went back to Canada. They got divorced and he passed away about a year or 2 later. I'm pretty good now. I became a crown ward and my custodial guardians turned out to be real jerks, but finishing up my degree. Funny though, it's easier to tell a bunch of strangers on Reddit this stuff than even my closest friends. Next story. When I was younger, my grandparents were the main people taking care of me while my parents worked. My grandfather was an alcoholic who always got into trouble for stupid reasons. Well, there was one guy who was fed up with my grandfather. He snuck into our house, kidnapped me, and put me inside of a basket where I'd have to stay in for a while. My grandmother started to look everywhere and called the police, but right before they found me, the guy had cut the side of my face as some form of revenge. So now I have this notable scar on my cheek. Next story. About a year ago, I was held captive by my now and, at the time, ex. I had been in a physically and emotionally abusive relationship with him, and if you know anything about emotional abuse, there is a lot of guilt from the victim. I thought it was my fault. I believed him when he made me feel he owed me an explanation for the previous assaults. Cue me meeting him at a grimy motel and being held there for the next 12 or so hours, being assaulted physically and being attacked physically and assaulted. When people wonder why you stay in an abusive relationship, they clearly know nothing of the mindset a victim is put in. As much as I hate referring to myself as such, I tried all night to reason with him and find a way to leave. At 8 in the morning, I took my bleeding self and screamed in his face as he blocked the door, and I broke the goddamn window. I ran to my car and called the police, and besides being assaulted and suffering bruises and lacerations, I was alive. I'll still never forgive the people who didn't call the police even though there was a girl screaming bloody murder in the room next to them. I know they heard. I feel like just from a humanity perspective, it should be so easy. If you're somewhere and you hear someone screaming like they're dying in the room next to you, you should probably call the police or something. I don't know why you wouldn't. I guess if you're doing something illegal in the room next to them and you're like, I don't want the police involved in anything, maybe, but like, come on. It should be so easy. Is it just the bystander effect or what, man? I want to believe that if I'm in that situation, yeah, I'm calling the police. And I hope I'm not wrong about that. Next story. My mom kidnapped me when I was about 5. I didn't realize it was a kidnapping until I was in my late 20s. I'm 39 now. That was after she told me the whole story. Parents have been divorced since before I could remember them together. I just remember as a child she asked me if I wanted to go to Texas with her. We lived in Washington State. I was 5. I didn't know what Texas was. Just thought it was a summer vacation. She liked to do road trip vacations and I'd gone with her in the past, so I wanted to go. This must have been about 81-ish. So we drove up to Houston, ended up living there for quite a while. I remember going to either preschool or kindergarten there, so we were there for some time. Really don't remember much. Eventually, we moved back to Washington State, and this time we got to fly. The only thing I remember about the plane trip is that somehow we ended up on a plane with either the whole Celtics team or just Larry Bird. I distinctly remember people talking about Larry Bird being on the plane, even though I had no idea who that was. Just fascinated about someone named Bird. We make it back home, I end up back at my dad's, and I thought nothing of it. As I mentioned, I found out in my later years after she told me the full story. She had taken me to Houston without my dad's permission. When she ran out of resources, she eventually phoned my dad and asked for money to get back home. He bought the plane tickets to make sure I could get home safe. Apparently, he made arrangements for a bounty hunter to be waiting at the airport for her when we got off the plane. Oddly enough, we somehow managed an earlier flight in and avoided the scene with the bounty hunter. Mom never got arrested. I ended up back at my dad's. They still talk crap about each other, and I still see them both. The first time I ever saw them even touch was about 3 months ago when my older brother passed away. He was 42. They hugged and cried when they saw each other. They do speak occasionally now, but only in formal arrangements dealing with my brother's passing. Next story. When I was 15, my parents decided to separate, and my mom was moving across a few states. Because my dad didn't technically have legal custody of me, my mom had to take me with her to the new state. I was upset about leaving, so she said I could live with my dad for the summer and come up to her house once I needed to start school. Well, my dad was living in our old house, which was mostly empty and had no power. He was moving out as well, and since the power, water, and fridge were all gone, I couldn't very well stay there. I stayed with a friend for a long time until this guy came around. The guy was from my church, and I knew his family vaguely. I was 15, and he was 23. He abused me and manipulated me until my self-esteem was low enough that he essentially kidnapped me. He would move me around from house to house because his summer job was house/dog sitting for random families. He assaulted me by telling me I wouldn't be able to do certain things if I didn't let him. Because I was 15 with no car, no job or money, no home, I was afraid of what would happen if he stopped supporting me. I eventually got brought to my mom's house by some family friends, but by that time, the damage was done. I went to therapy to treat my subsequent PTSD from that summer, and the guy went on to marry my former best friend who was only a yearish older than me. They've been together ever since the end of that summer. I'm doing better since I cut the two of them out of my life. Emotionally, therapy helped tremendously after I'd gotten back to my mom. My mother constantly belittled me for allowing him to do this to me, but she's a narcissist, diagnosed, so I try to ignore it. OP, I am so sorry you're surrounded by people who told you it was your fault. Maybe not surrounded, but definitely your mother because you said so, and I'm assuming your used-to-be friend. Because if your friend believed you and, took your side, as a good friend should, in my opinion, I don't think she would have run off with him. Just a guess. Next story. My grandfather was held hostage during business right after his 2 tours in Vietnam. His name is Robert Brown. It was around 1985. So he spent his life after Vietnam very lost. Didn't have much to do or a place to go. He ended up living with his brother for a while until he found a job. He was a sales associate for a company called Boston Scientific. He would travel all across the world doing his work and whatnot until one flight left him in a hostage situation. After negotiations with weapons and whatnot, they let off the women and children from the plane, then some men. The terrorists that would later form Al-Qaeda kept my grandfather and 4 other men in a small room for about 17 days after the initial hijacking. My grandfather always said he made friends with one of them because of a watch that had a nice little translator on it. This room was about 10 by 10 feet or so and had a hole in the corner to poop in. After all those days, he was finally released when the US government traded weapons for their safe delivery home. That's how the story was told to me. By the way, he's 73 as of 4 days ago and is living wealthy and happy. He says it was nothing compared to Vietnam, but was glad when he came back to see my mom and grandmother there waiting for him with a yellow ribbon. I mean, I guess it's, some sort of lucky that OP's grandfather was a veteran. The average man probably would have just lost their mind during this. Fair. Very, very fair. But OP's grandfather, I guess, was battle hardened, for lack of a better term. Anyway, I'm glad to hear he's living happily now, because woof, does he ever deserve it. Next story. Although this has never happened to me, I know of two people. One, my grandfather, and two, our next door neighbor. My grandpa was taken hostage during the Japanese occupation in the Philippines. Long story short, he was imprisoned for 1 year. Though his captors didn't mistreat him, he was terrified about the uncertainty, and understandably so. With some twist of fate, he was able to escape by swapping his clothes with the soldier he had befriended in exchange for something. I believe it was tobacco, but not sure. My grandpa returned home alive and unharmed after a year of captivity. He is now 92, will be 93 on July 25th, and he has no ill feelings about what happened to him. My neighbor, on the other hand, had it pretty bad. She's the wife of a captain. They come from a prominent family. She attended a party in a province somewhere in the Philippines when a group of armed rebels stormed the house. She was held for ransom for a lot of money, millions of pesos. The family was able to get her back, but they lost everything, including their home. The wife suffered from PTSD and eventually had a stroke. She's wheelchair-bound and a recluse now. Very sad about what happened to her. Next story. I was kidnapped when I was in 3rd grade along with my sister by our birth mother. One day we were at school, not a care in the world, and the teacher comes up to me and says, "Your mom is here to pick you up." I'm just there thinking, sweet, go out to the car and my sister is there too. Don't think anything of it. Thus began the 10-hour car ride out of the state to our mom's sister's house. I had no idea at the time, of course, this was a kidnapping. My mother and father's relationship wasn't the best. She was, and possibly still is, a drug addict, and unfortunately he passed when I was 12. But I finished out the school year in another state, another school, another set of friends, only to come home one day and find my dad there yelling at everyone involved after finally finding my sister and I. We went back with him as he was the only one of the two who could hold a job. Before anyone asks, no, I never got the full story from either of them, and I haven't talked to my mother in over 15 years. I'm 25 now, a veteran, and have a great job, solid girlfriend, and to live on the opposite side of the country as my weird, freaked up family. Next story. Back in the summer of '84, I was 5. My mom was out and about, probably on a drug run with some of her friends. One of her druggy friends that I knew as Tracy came by and told me that my mom wasn't feeling well, and she was going to take me to see her. I had seen Tracy and she wasn't a stranger, so I went with her. When we got to Tracy's place, my mother wasn't there. Tracy said that she must have been feeling better and run to the store to get me a snack. Needless to say, my mom didn't show up for a long time. Long enough for me to go to bed for the night and wake up the next day. When my mother didn't show up, I guess my little kid brain knew something wasn't right, and I took my first opportunity to run. I made it to a convenience store, called my grandmother's house, and the store owner told her where I was. When they, being the authorities, went to find Tracy, she was gone. My mother never heard from her again. It wasn't a long time, but who knows how close I was to being another kid on the side of a milk carton. Next story. I'm originally from Canada. When I was about 4 years old, my mother shipped me off to live in the United States to live with her father and stepmother. At the time, I was unaware of what was going on, and I thought I was visiting them. Eventually, what was supposed to be a 3-week trip turned into a never-ending trip. We eventually moved from LA to Las Vegas. When we got to Las Vegas, we were always moving. My mom would call every so often, but I never heard from my dad until sometime when I was 8. He got in contact with me via phone for a little bit and then disappeared again when we moved. I later figured out he had hired a private detective to find me, so he flew to Las Vegas. And unfortunately, by the time he had got to the apartment we were at, we moved. When I was 11 years old, I got called into the principal's office and I was told that my father had sent a postcard to every school in Las Vegas to find me. Apparently my mother, grandfather, and step-grandmother were hiding me from my dad, and I had no clue. From the ages of 6 to 12, my step-grandmother would physically and mentally abuse me. She would say she would end me, lock me away, say I was worthless, and that's just a snippet of what she would do. I got fed up, so I ran away in April 2003. During that time, I got a hold of my dad, and he booked a flight to come get me. So I left May 20th, 2003. My friends at school told me my step-grandmother told the school I moved to Mexico. She also told my parents I was at a camp. To this day, my mother denies that they abused abused me, so we no longer talk. Turns out my mother might have a mental disorder. To this day, it's difficult for me to look back at what happened and make sense of it. Part of the difficulty also stems from the trauma that I went through, so I break down a bit when I think about it too much. This is just a summary of what happened to me while I was missing from my father. As a happy ending, though, I finished college and got a job in a field that I love. My dad and I are close. I have a great family I came back to, and I have a great partner. Definitely a recurring theme of mental disorders from the kidnappers, which makes sense. It's hard to imagine a perfectly sane individual doing something like that. It's normally not the solution to a problem our brains jump to first, after all. But OP, I'm glad you made it out of there, and I'm proud of you for saying, nah, I'm not interested in talking to the people who essentially kept me captive. I understand there's probably some draw that's like, well, they are family, but you gotta prioritize you and your mental health. So good on you. Glad to hear you're doing well, and I hope you keep doing well. Anyway, that's the last story for today. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.